Hello, hello, welcome.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hi, Peter. Oh, here.
Hi, Laura. Thanks for joining.
Oh, absolutely. And Derek.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Stephen.
Oh, hi.
I hear a frog.
Was that not
Is that a frog?
That was my frog clock.
Oh, I
It
love
goes off
it.
by the hour. Different frogs.
Fantastic. I have to get one of those. So hello, everybody. Welcome to the second webinar in Friends of the Forest Preserves Hidden Life of the Preserves webinar series. We are going to get started in about 5 minutes to allow all of our guests to settle into the Zoom. We had over 100 people register tonight, so
Wow.
we are very excited about that. We could definitely not get 100 people out in the preserve together at once, so this is fantastic. While you're waiting, please take a moment to say hello in the chat feature. If you look at the bottom of your screen and click on chat, you can type in a hello and tell us who you are and where you're tuning in from. Then please take a moment to answer a couple of questions. It's just 2 questions for our poll. The poll should pop up on your screen now. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are going to get started in just a minute. While you're waiting, please say hello in the chat. Tell us where you're calling in from. And take just a few seconds to answer the 2 questions you see on the pop-up screen. Oh, great to see people from all over the county joining us tonight. Evanston, Glenview, Elk Grove Village, Palos Park, Berwyn, Arlington Heights. Wow, this is fantastic. Skokie. Welcome, welcome. If you're just joining us, we're going to get started in about a couple minutes, but we're just asking people to say hello in the chat feature, tell us where you're calling in from, and then take our poll that has 2 questions in the pop-up box that you should see on your screen. Wow, it's great to see so many people from all over the county joining tonight. Hello, hello. We have people from various parts of the city, Andersonville, Edgewater. Oh my, this is the first one I've seen hello from Barrington, which is surprising. And I thought most people would be calling in from Barrington tonight. So this is really great. We have a wonderful variety of Cook County residents. Maybe 1 more minute for people to join in. If you're just joining us, please say hello and tell us where you're calling in from. I feel like a radio host for some reason, but I just tell us where you're joining us, where you're joining from in the chat, and then answer our 2 questions in our poll, and then we'll get started. Ooh, Mount Prosperous. Okay, I think we have a lot of our guests on tonight already, 64 people and counting, 65. This is wonderful. Welcome everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Thank you for participating in that. So it looks like we have most of our guests tonight visit a local forest preserve every so often, and about 67% of you are Friends of the Forest Preserves members, and 33% of you might be very soon. So let's get started. Hello again, welcome to the Hidden Life of Spring Creek webinar. My name is Radhika Muralia. I am the Advocacy and Engagement Director at Friends of the Forest Preserves. We're so glad you joined us and hope you walk away this evening with some new information about the nature and people that make this Wild West type forest preserve amazing. We also hope you find some new inspiration to get outdoors and maybe even volunteer your time toward helping nature thrive here. Friends of the Forest Preserves unites people to protect, promote, and care for the forest preserves in Cook County. As an independent nonprofit organization solely focused on the forest preserves in Cook County, we work tirelessly to safeguard and improve the 70,000 acres of forest preserves for all of us and generations to come. We're so glad to connect with you today, though we'd much prefer to hang out with you outdoors. Again, we would not be able to have so many people together at once outside right now, so we're happy to connect with you in this way. This evening's program is part 2 in our series of webinars this summer. We will continue to zoom in on specific regions of the county to explore. Next Wednesday, July 22nd, we'll explore the Calumet region. On July 29th, we'll highlight the North Branch region. And on August 5th, we'll take you to the Palos region in southwestern Cook. Registration for all of those is now available on our website. A few housekeeping notes before I turn it over to Peter Whitney, who's our presenter this evening. First, I'd like to introduce you to Derek Zomber, who is keeping us on track with our technology today. If you have any issues, you can send him a direct chat. Thank you, Derek. Second, we are going to mute everyone during the presentation, but we welcome questions through the chat feature. So as soon as a question pops into your head, feel free to post it into the chat, and we'll get to it at the end during the Q&A session. And lastly, please be aware that this session is being recorded. So now I will mute myself and hand it over to Peter Whitney, who is a Spring Creek field organizer at Friends. And I hope you have a great evening.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm gonna share my screen, and in case it's not displaying, someone let me know, but without further ado, I'll go ahead and get started. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us tonight, and it's really nice to see some familiar faces, hear about some past volunteers, current volunteers, as well as a lot of new folks. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of something for everyone, a little bit of basics, but also some of those secret tips that you're hoping to get about Spring Creek Forest Preserve that'll make your next visit all the much better. So thanks again for joining, and tonight, really, truly, I'm excited to share a little bit more about a part of Cook County and about a forest preserve that's become really important to me. And as Radhika mentioned, it's part of a larger webinar series that the Friends of the Forest Preserves is hosting. So tonight we're going to focus on the northwest section of Cook County, and specifically at Spring Creek Forest Preserve, where I spend a lot of my time and do a lot of my work. So as you might have guessed by now, That's me on the left. Peter, hello. And my role with Friends is the Spring Creek field organizer. As the field organizer, I work with volunteer groups and I work to support volunteer-led conservation projects. I grew up in Lake County, where I spent a lot of time exploring the forest preserve and natural areas there, and was introduced to the world of land conservation and ecological restoration through an internship in high school. And pretty much have been in love with the plants, animals, and people and landscapes of Chicagoland ever since. So today we're going to start with a little bit of an introduction to the forest preserves and also to the Friends of the Forest Preserve. We're going to spend some time talking about Spring Creek Forest Preserve, which is part of, as I call it, the Wild Northwest. And I'm going to share a few resources that I've found useful in figuring out and exploring the preserves. And hopefully you'll leave with an idea of how you'd like to find your unique place in the preserves. To me, the forest preserves are really a vast system that's kind of hard to wrap your head around, and each area is unique, but there are some common threads that tie it all together. And these common threads, or this hidden life within the preserves, is really sustained by the plants, the animals, the natural areas, the volunteers, and advocates, but ultimately it's the people and it's you who make that hidden life so special. So to start, if everyone will humor me, and for folks that have their camera off, you can close your eyes. For folks that don't and are, want to keep your eyes open, that's okay too. But we're going to start on a July morning in 1833 in Cook County. And the day is beginning. It's just starting to heat up. Birds and insects are calling from all around you, and the world is waking up. For me, I'm imagining both an incredible stillness and a world full of life. And in fact, as I looked at this picture and kind of think of the last sunrise that I spent outside at Spring Creek Forest Preserve, it's a lot. It's a lot to take in, and it's kind of a lot to describe. And I am glad to know that a lot of folks throughout history have felt that same experience as they came to Spring Creek Forest Preserve, including Colby Benton, who visited the Forest Preserves way back in 1833. And even back then, it was the Wild Northwest, as he wrote in his journal, a visitor to Chicago, Journal of the Far Off West. And I'll go ahead and read his little excerpt. I could but think, what a view for a painter of landscapes. The marsh extending as far as the eye could see, covered with the thick high grass, and the little cluster of tall and bright green tamaracks in the center, and the marsh surrounded by groves of oak extending on here and there. Altogether, the view was most splendid and far beyond the powers of a painter to describe. And Colby felt that way back in 1833, and I'm glad that somebody took up the challenge, and I'm so glad it was somebody who has a lot more talent than me. But Philip Juris is an artist who's really been taken a fascination with Spring Creek Forest Preserve and with all the forest preserves in Cook County and throughout the Midwest. And he visited Spring Creek Forest Preserve off of Bateman Road, for those that are familiar with the area, and on a July morning back in 2015. He experienced a sunrise and had just happened to be reading this journal by Colby Benton, and was inspired to try and recreate some of the landscapes found in Spring Creek Forest Preserve, in addition to a collection that he'd been doing of other landscapes throughout Cook County and in the Midwest. For those of you who are interested in seeing more of Philip Juris's work, there was going to be an exhibition called Picturing the Prairie at the Chicago Botanic Gardens. Since the Botanic Gardens had closed as a result of the pandemic, it's been postponed, but you can still see a lot of his work at his website, which is in the bottom right corner of this slide, philipjuris.com. But I start with this slide just to kind of remind us of what a truly unique and magical place we live in Chicagoland. I think it's kind of easy to forget as you drive down I-90 or wherever you're going through the city to reach these natural areas. But we live in such a rich, diverse, kind of magical natural space. And sometimes it takes a sunrise to remind you of that, but I think it was a good place. And if anyone's been closing their eyes this whole time, you can go ahead and open them back up. But the really amazing thing about the forest preserves in general, but in Spring Creek in particular, is that the same inspiration that Colby Benton had in 1833 and Philip Juris had in 2015, you can experience that every morning again at Spring Creek. And it's untouched landscape that's really waiting there to experience in the same way. So welcome to the wonderful world of Cook County and the Wild West of Spring Creek Forest Preserve. So as Colby Benton traveled through Cook County heading west, he would have witnessed an amazing diversity of plants, animals, and natural wonders. And we're still able to experience those in the forest preserves today. And really there's countless nuances between the natural areas in the Chicagoland area, but there are 4 primary sort of ecosystems that we generally find in the forest preserve. There's woodlands, there's wetlands, savannas, and prairies. And a lot of them kind of mix together and blend between one and the other, but each one really has its own unique suite of plants and animals, and it's those hidden relationships between all of them that really make them so special. And fortunately for us, they're not all sectioned off in different parts of the county. In one trip to Spring Creek and many other preserves, you can experience in a short walk all 4 of these preserves and much more than in any one visit. So when Colby Benton was writing his journal of the far off West, Cook County looked a little bit more like the image on the left. All the green and pink that you see are natural undeveloped areas. Those are those woodlands, prairies, savannas, and wetlands that we were talking about. And then on the left, you can see those little dots of red. Those are the townships, homes, and development throughout the 1800s. Well, if we fast forward to 2015, it looks quite a bit different. There's a whole lot of red. We've developed just about all that we can, but you can still see some of those green landscapes, some of those corridors holding on. And really those corridors, while there's a whole lot more of them back in 1800, they still contain all those special ecosystems that Chicago has. In fact, Chicago is kind of the meeting place between the cooler temperatures of Lake Michigan, eastern forest, western grasslands. They all kind of combine here in Chicago and create this really ecologically diverse area. And in fact, Cook County is the most ecologically diverse county of any in the entire state of Illinois. And in large part, that's due to the area that we've preserved in the Cook County Forest Preserves. So the Forest Preserves of Cook County, they exist to conserve and improve on this diversity on those green spots that we saw on the map. And I put up the mission of the Forest Preserve District. I won't be able to spend a whole lot of time diving deep into the Forest Preserves or the Forest Preserves of Cook County today. Our Executive Director of Friends of the Forest Preserves, Benjamin Cox, he gave a great presentation about the history of the Forest Preserves last week, and we have that up on YouTube for anyone who's interested to join. But altogether, this system makes up almost 70,000 acres. And as we take a moment to step back in history and think about land and the ownership of land, and a really important note that I want to make is that the green spaces that we saw in 1800, even though they were ecologically intact and weren't quite developed in the same way that we think of it today, they were absolutely not unoccupied. And Cook County's cultural heritage is just as amazingly unique as its natural heritage. And the Forest Preserves of Cook County and all of Cook County itself is the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, among many other Native American tribes. And it was and continues to be used by dozens and dozens of Native American tribes as a place of travel, trade, gathering, and healing. So the Forest Preserve is split up into 5 main districts. And then today we're going to spend most of our time circling in on that Northwest Center, and specifically circling in on Spring Creek Forest Preserve. So that was a quick introduction to the Forest Preserve and just a few of the reasons why we love them. But it has so many friends, and where do all the friends come in? So I work for the Friends of the Forest Preserves, and we're a nonprofit organization whose mission is to unite people to protect, promote, and care for the Forest Preserves of Cook County. Like I said, we're a nonprofit, we're membership-based, and largely we're an advocacy organization that works really closely with volunteers, with partners, with members of the public, and with Forest Preserve staff to solve problems together. So really, I like to think of us as another one of these little hidden relationships in the Forest Preserves of Cook County. We love hearing from the community about questions or concerns they have about the Forest Preserves, and really what we learn from our volunteers and from our community members, and try to bring it to the forefront and bring it to the Forest Preserve staff and solve problems together. And this photo is taken at one of our work days together, and I think it kind of shows the spirit of Friends of the Forest Preserves well. In this photo, there's members of Friends of the Forest Preserves, there's Forest Preserve staff, including the Fox River Conservation Corps crew, which works every day of the week out in the Forest Preserves. There's Forest Preserve of Cook County staff, there's partner organizations represented, there's just members of the general public, and we're all coming together at a work day at Spring Creek Forest Preserve, actually, to unite around a common goal and really work towards what ultimately is the most important, and that's the nature in the Cook County Forest Preserves. So now that we have a little background on what makes this region so special, let's zoom into the area where I spend most of my time. So this is that map of the forest preserves of Cook County. And then when I think of maps, and I think most folks feel the same way, when they think of maps, they kind of just default to Google Maps. So here is Spring Creek Forest Preserve on the upper left of this Google Maps image. Spring Creek Forest Preserve, or often also called Spring Lake Forest Preserve, and I'm going to use those kind of interchangeably throughout the presentation tonight. It's just north of I-90. It's south of Barrington, east of Carpentersville, and neighbors a whole lot of other forest preserve and natural areas throughout both Cook County, but it's also in the far northwest section of Cook County. It's this sort of quad county areas where we've got a lot of green space that melds between all the different counties outside of Cook County. So there's Spring Creek Forest Preserve. It's far enough to earn its title of the wild Northwest, but still really accessible by any of us city residents. I know I come from the Edgewater area. I take that I-90 out, and a lot of our volunteers actually take that trip several times a week. So it's far enough to feel like you're a world away, but still close enough to be accessible for all of us. So altogether, Spring Creek Forest Preserve is almost 4,000 acres. And 4,000 acres is a lot more than I can cover in any one presentation today. And it sounds like a really big number, 4,000 acres, but a lot of us don't spend much time measuring acres in our everyday life. So for reference, Grant Park in downtown Chicago is about 320 acres. That's including all the grounds, Millennium Park, Maggie Daley Park, all that. So Spring Creek is about 12.5 Grant Parks all by itself. And since it's the wild Northwest, most of the time you have all that entirely to yourself and you'll hardly see another visitor. So I wanted to kind of ground us in Spring Creek Forest Preserve by thinking about the creek itself. I'm going to show a few pictures of the creek as it moves northward in the preserve. As far as I know, Spring Creek is the only creek to have its actual headwaters or where the creek begins, the start of the creek within a forest preserve. And from its headwaters, which is just north of Higgins Road and kind of the bottom of that map that I've got in this slide, it meanders through meadows and woodlands. It disappears in a lot of spots into wetlands, into lakes, and eventually makes its way into the Fox River. And because the headwaters is in a forest preserve and the land is protected, and so much of the actual creek itself is within protected either forest preserve or nature preserve or in kind of less developed neighboring private property as it flows into the Fox River. It's got one of the highest water qualities in all of Cook County and is really a special creek all of itself in this blue corridor that kind of ties it all together. So here's a picture of Spring Creek in its southern reach. And like I said, it kind of meanders through the preserve and it's kind of a good marking point as you're exploring the preserve. You can always come back to the creek and find where you are. And this northern section, it's hard to even see the creek is in there, but that's it as it flows into Spring Lake. This is a large remnant sedge meadow, which is a really high quality wetland area just recently after prescribed burn. So it doesn't always look like that. Usually it's really green, but it's a really special place. So there's Spring Creek itself, and I'll say it's huge. If anybody is inspired to walk or to explore the entire forest preserve, I challenge you to do so and come to our next work day and tell us about it. You'll have bragging rights for the rest of the year because it's really a whole lot of area to explore and so much to find. And that's what a lot of folks really like about Spring Creek. It's that wilderness character. There's so much to explore and you can really find solitude and find natural areas that feel like they're a world away. All the trails in Spring Creek are mown grass paths. And there's 4 trailheads in Spring Creek, so not that many places to access. It's really easy to kind of quickly find yourself in a place that feels like it's hidden from the rest of the world. And to actually get to these places, there's a whole lot you can do. Spring Creek allows a wide range of recreational opportunities. Of course, hiking and walking is a great way to kind of find your way through the preserve. There's also a really strong equestrian community out at Spring Creek Forest Preserve, including the Barrington Hills Riding Center, which is adjacent to the Forest Preserve and one of the trailheads. One of my favorite ways to explore the preserve is by bike, and there's also a whole network of trails outside of the Spring Creek Forest Preserve that connects to different natural areas out in the Barrington area and in Northwest Cook County. So if folks are interested in more details about that, send me an email because I've got lots of thoughts about cool different routes to explore by bike. Birding is extremely popular at Spring Creek Forest Preserve, and you'll find all sorts of opportunities for early morning birding where I can guarantee you'll be just about the only person in the preserve. But for me, I think one of the greatest things about it is that it's just a place where you can kind of wander and look up, look down, and just admire everything around you. And especially the oak canopies, it's really a special place where you can, whatever method you're doing, it's a place you can find all to your own. So a large part of its appeal is its wilderness sense, and we call it the Wild West kind of half jokingly. But the trail system can be a little intimidating at Spring Creek, even for someone like me who spends a lot of time there. So part of my goal as the Spring Creek field organizer is to make the preserve itself a little more accessible to the average user. And there's a number of ways to do that. And I use a combination of tools before I visit the preserve anytime I go out. Because we aren't able to gather in as large groups and we're practicing social distancing, I've been experimenting a lot more with social media, and our field organizer team has been practicing making videos. And we think this is a really great tool for introducing new audiences and folks like you all to the preserve. So I'm going to show you a quick video I made to introduce the Forest Preserve and how to access Spring Creek Forest Preserve. And then we'll kind of dive into some of the methods that I actually use. Just a warning before I play the video, we practiced before and the volume was kind of loud. So in case your volume is turned up to hear me right now, you might want to turn it down before I play the video. So the first tool that I want to introduce, which I showed in the video, is the Forest Preserve of Cook County interactive map. And this is really a wonderful resource for anyone who hasn't spent much time exploring it. It's not only a great resource for finding preserves throughout the county, you can easily find the ones nearest to you, and then you can also filter by the kinds of activities that are available at the preserve itself. So in the video, I showed the equestrian trailhead, which had a lot of information about how to access the preserve. And we're going to spend a little bit of time just kind of practicing and getting used to that system. And the reason I want to spend a little bit of time practicing it is because if you, for instance, go to the Spring Lake Equestrian Parking Trailhead, this is what you're going to see. And let me tell you, if you're looking at this map and feeling a little bit confused as to where you might start with the hike, I can promise you it's every bit as confusing and quite a bit more in person. So fear not, if you spent a little bit of time preparing for your visit to the preserve before you go, this trail system becomes a whole lot more manageable. And because the trails are mowed grass. They're subject to changing a little bit. There aren't very many trail markers when you're out there, and a lot of the preserve has been converted from former homesteads and farms. These trail systems end up looking a lot denser than they actually are in person, and they can be a little bit intimidating, but just by spending a little bit of time ahead of time preparing, you're going to be a lot better equipped to explore the preserve. But like I mentioned, this is a fantastic resource if you're trying to find a place to cross-country ski or a place to go ride a horse. This website or the interactive trail map has all of that laid out for you. So before you get started and anytime before I go to the preserve, I kind of quick check in on 3 resources, which I find really helpful, particularly at Spring Creek Forest Preserve. The first is the Spring Lake or Spring Creek, and I know, sorry, it's a little confusing, but we use those interchangeably. The Spring Lake Forest Preserve website. That page has information about the natural history of the site, activities that are allowed, volunteer opportunities, and all sorts of useful information. And it's also through that page that you can access the interactive map that we explored in the last slide. So both of those are the first 2 places I check. But lastly, the thing I never go to the forest preserves without, and perhaps most useful for when you're actually visiting in the preserve, is your smartphone. It might seem a little bit basic or obvious, but it's really an invaluable tool, both for navigation and for safety when you're ever in the preserves. Fortunately, being in Cook County, most people, including myself, have full cell phone coverage wherever I go in the preserve. So whenever I go out, I just use Google Maps, and Google Maps has done a really good job of showing all of those trails that you have in Spring Creek and overlaying them in the map. So wherever you are, you can just double check against your phone, see where your blue dot or your GPS point is relative to the trails on the map. And that way you can always make sure that you're heading in the direction that you want to head and know your way back to the parking lot that you started at. So that's how you prepare before you go out into the field. But now I thought I'd share a couple of recommendations about my favorite places to visit in the preserve. First, every time I head out to Spring Creek, I start out at Penny Road Pond. It's one of the 4 trailheads, but it's the largest and the most often used. And it's got, you can see in the background, the amenity of the Penny Road Pond itself, but it's a really good starting point for exploring the preserve, especially some of the high quality areas that volunteers have worked to restore. So I'm going to show you 2 different walks and another tool that you can use to access some of those walks or to help guide you along your way. And I think both of them are really great, both for newer visitors to the preserve to kind of get acquainted with the trail system and practice and find your way around, but also for experienced hikers and bikers and equestrian folks. They're always worth visiting, and for that reason, I always stop at Penny Road Pond anytime I go out. So the first quick hike, it's about half a mile, and it's one that I do every time I go out, and that is visiting the Galloping Hill Prairie. So this web page that I'm showing you here is from the Hiking Project, and the Hiking Project is both a website and a phone-based app where you can access these walks that I've added to the site, as well as lots more in the area. This is the website view, but you can also see it pretty easily on your cell phone and track yourself as you walk in real time using the phone. It includes relevant information about the hike or the trail walk, site history, natural information, photos, a lot of really good information. It's a good resource to get familiar with. So this first half-mile loop is, I do it every time I go to Spring Creek Forest Preserve. For me, it's kind of like the warm-up that gets me ready for a whole day in the preserve, and that's the Galloping Hill Wildlife Loop, starting at the Penny Road Pond parking lot. And this here is the Galloping Hill Prairie in front of me. For folks, you know, we call that a hill. I know it might be kind of hard to see in this photo, but we'll take what we can get. It is a hill, I promise, when you go out there in person. And the prairie is actually the longest running site where volunteers have worked to restore the native ecosystem of the native prairie there. And you can really expect to find just a wonderful introduction to both the trail system there, but also to the plants and wildlife of Northern Illinois and Spring Creek Forest Preserve specifically. The first example of wildlife that you'll see is this is a male bobolink. And right now as I speak, last time I was in the preserve over the weekend, all the male bobolinks were kind of flocking together and getting ready for their long migration south. Bobolinks are a really amazing species of bird, and every year they travel all the way from South America, as as far south as Argentina, all the way to Spring Creek Forest Preserve and other northern Illinois nesting sites. They have a short nesting season, and by now they're getting ready to start that flight all the way back south. Right around now, we're kind of entering into this time of year where you have some beautiful pinks and reds in the prairie, and these are all native wildflowers. In the center is cardinal flower, and in the background, that pink is, to me and anybody who's volunteered recently in the last few weeks has heard me talking about the species of milkweeds in bloom. This is swamp milkweed, and I think this is the best smelling flower in all of Illinois. To me, it's kind of like a strawberry candy. It might be different to you, but it's hard to describe, but if you haven't smelled the swamp milkweed yet this year, you have to. And then as the summer progresses, you have this series of wildflowers and plants and animals and wildlife that kind of cascade throughout the season. Last year, this on the right is a spiranthes, or a lady's tress orchid. There was an amazing display last year at Galloping Hill, growing out of the trail itself, orchids as far as the eye could see. And you never really know what you're gonna find when you go to the Galloping Hill Prairie. So it's always worth that first stop. So the next hike is a little bit longer, and it's also using that same tool of the hiking project, and that is the Hidden Pond Loop. After you do your half-mile loop at Galloping Hill Prairie, you go back to the Penny Road parking lot, refuel on snacks, grab lunch, refill your water bottle, and then this is about a 1.5 mile hike. That's another great introduction to the preserve. This one's slightly longer, but you'll pass through really high-quality woodlands, open meadows, and ideally you'll find a moment of solitude at Hidden Pond. And knock on wood, I can tell you every single time I've been out to Hidden Pond, I've been the only visitor. And it wouldn't be a bad thing if there were other folks there, but it really feels like a place that you just have all to yourself anytime you go and visit. And that's true no matter the season. From a cool fall day, enjoying the changes in the color of the leaves, to a spring morning surrounded by the first blooms of the year. I really like Hidden Pond in the early spring for these spring ephemerals, or these short-lived wildflowers that are among the very first to bloom in northern Illinois and at Spring Creek Forest Preserve. You have a really great display of them at Hidden Pond. Here's a few photos from earlier this spring. You have wild hyacinth on the left, trout lily in the center, and then bloodroot on the right. This is just a few of these cool spring ephemeral flowers that are here in an instant and then gone before you know it, but they're kind of that harbinger of spring, that beginning of the season. And it's another really great place to see wildlife that you might not find in the prairie. On the bottom left is an indigo bunting, and then on the right is a red-headed woodpecker. Just one of a few birds that you'll find on your quick walk back to Hidden Pond. But there's so much to discover and so much to find no matter how you get back there. So no matter where you go or how you get there, to discover how we're all part of these hidden lives of the forest preserve, I think it's really important that you just find your place in it and you actually get out and spend your time in the preserves. And whether it's hiking the trails, fishing at Penny Road Pond, looking for wildlife, or biking and connecting them all together, my goal is to help you connect to the forest preserves and find your place within it. And if you're asking me, the very best way to do that is to volunteer. And not just volunteering with anybody, you'd be volunteering with the Spring Creek Stewards. And the Spring Creek Stewards is truly an amazing group. There's some of them actually in this call here tonight. And they work to care for, protect, and restore the native ecosystems of the Spring Creek Forest Preserve. The Spring Creek volunteers and any ecological restoration volunteer, they really get to know the preserves better than anyone because they spend so much time out there throughout the whole year. And to me, that's really the coolest part of volunteering, is that you get to participate in the kind of magical, dependable annual cycle of nature reinventing itself and marching from spring to summer to fall and changing as the seasons turn over. And you get to actually take part in these transformations. You get to be right next to those plants as they move from spring into summer and all those cool transformations that are happening all around you. You're really an important part of it. And so what do volunteers do all year round? Well, depends on the season. We're just kind of getting out of an important part of the year where we're removing invasive species that are threatening prairie plants. This here is Carla removing the biggest white sweet clover of the day at one of our work days. As you get later into the summer and into the fall, We spend a lot of time collecting native plant seeds and then distributing them in other parts of the preserve. When it comes to winter, we switch over to removing woody plants and invasive species like buckthorn or honeysuckle that really invade our woodland or the edges of our prairies. And then again in the spring and fall, we really volunteers get to participate in it all. And the power of prescribed fire or burning in native Illinois ecosystems is really an important tool in reestablishing those native ecosystems, and volunteers are able to be trained and participate in those prescribed fires. But the most important activity by far is the snacks. And anyone who's come out to a Spring Creek Forest Preserve work day with the Spring Creek stewards know that they take snacks very seriously. And we kind of say that in a tongue-in-cheek way, but truly it's the people that make the preserve so special, and it's that snack time and the time you spend with your fellow volunteers that really makes it feel like a community and helps you understand why it's so important that we give back to these spaces. And especially in an urban area like Chicago, our native ecosystems they're always going to be facing pressure from development, from invasive plant species moving in, from highways to our boots, suppression of natural disturbances, and so many other kind of changes to the way these ecosystems naturally would work. So in order to have healthy nature in Chicago, there's no way to do it without us, and we have to be involved. And it's not a negative thing. It's really a really positive aspect where we are so integrally important to the function and to the value of these nature preserves that healthy nature in Chicago can't exist without us. And it's really amazing the volunteer impact that can be seen even over the course of 1 year. This is where the Spring Creek stewards worked last winter. They worked to clear this brush in December. This was in December at the top of the slide before they'd gotten started, when they wrapped up for the season in March. And then when we came back and visited it in June, and we visit it most weekends just to see how it's progressing, you can really, it's a pretty amazing visceral change that you're able to see, and you're able to watch as these native plants and animals reclaim and recreate these Illinois prairies, woodlands, wetlands, and savannas, and all these magical ecosystems that have inspired us for so long. And really, I was not kidding about those snacks. We haven't been able to spend as much time gathered around snacks as usual. But even though, usually we might be gathered in person for a talk like this, today it's a webinar. So of course we're changing to the world around us. But Spring Creek work days used to look a little bit more like this, or maybe something like this. And now they look a little bit more like this. And I quick put this slide in because I know Jenny is in the audience tonight, and that is her playing air guitar, and she is having a great time. And one thing that's been so cool about volunteering lately in the forest preserves is that even though we're adjusting to new rules and new procedures, we know that the nature and the community is really as strong as ever, and it's not stopping us from having a good time in the preserves. And the work that volunteers do is so important, but they really can't do it alone. And Spring Creek has the unique benefit of being in this far northwest corner of Cook County and surrounded by so many other amazing natural areas and amazing folks that do a lot of conservation work. So partners really help make the volunteer experience that much richer, and they let us do more to protect the nature that we all care about. At the bottom of this slide, I'm including a few key partners that make up this collective of organizations that we call the Barrington Greenway Initiative. And this was kind of born out of the idea, if you look at this map, Spring Creek or Spring Lake Forest Preserve is at the bottom of the slide. But there's all this other green space in the area, and there's even more than you can see in the picture. And the idea is that this collective of organizations, the Barrington Greenway Initiative, or BGI, could join together and do the work that we're all doing separately, but by coming together, we could take a little bit more focused of an approach in protecting and revitalizing the nature for everyone who calls Barrington at home. So the kind of the first thing that you recognize when you're mowing your lawn or you've got a plant that pops up in your backyard is that nature really doesn't recognize political boundaries, and it doesn't recognize these arbitrary lines that we put on a map. So maybe we shouldn't either. And the plants and animals don't care what county they're in. So we're going to do our best to protect the ecosystems that extend between them. So in this map, you see a lot of those dark green areas that are protected in forest preserves or official natural areas. But outside of those areas, there's a whole network of privately owned land conservancy spaces, backyards that are undeveloped, and all this green space that's really valuable habitat for plants, animals, and wildlife, and people. And the idea with the Barrington Greenway Initiative is that by stitching all these areas together and creating this culture of conservation, we can do a whole lot more and we can achieve more than we ever could on our own. So BGI, the initiative kind of comes together in a lot of different ways, and we strategize about how best to improve nature around us. But the ones I enjoy are our monthly BGI volunteer work days, where we all come together from different agencies and different volunteer groups and just do the work that we like doing the best. Each year we kind of select different areas where we are working on focus projects. So in 2019, we focused on Galloping Hill in Spring Creek Forest Preserve, Craftsbury, which is a Citizens for Conservation site, and Grassy Lake up in Lake County. And by focusing on energy and bringing folks together and having these larger work days, we're able to accomplish so much more than we're able to do on our own. We're able to clear more areas like we did at Craftsbury. We're able to plant more wetland plants than we could on our own. We're able to collect and spread more seed than we ever could. So no matter how you like to explore, or no matter where you find your place in the preserves, I really hope you'll join in on the fun here at Spring Creek Forest Preserve. We host volunteer opportunities, we host birding groups, group hikes, special events, land history tours. There's other ways to volunteer through the forest preserves of Cook County, like Trail Watch, and wherever you find yourself or however you think your place is in the preserves. I hope this webinar has kind of helped you find, understand, celebrate, and share in the hidden life that bring them all together. So thanks again, everybody, for joining. I hope I made it abundantly clear this is about Spring Creek Forest Preserve, but the Friends of the Forest Preserves are sharing more of these hidden life webinars about each of the different zones or sections of Cook County that we work in. So next week is the Calumet region with Gloria Orozco. It's going to be a really great webinar, and they're every Wednesday coming up the next few weeks. Real quick, last thing I wanted to share. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. I put my contact information in case anyone has more slides or wants to talk more about Spring Creek. I can talk your ear off about it. This pixelated image, if you use your cell phone, it's a QR code. And if you use your cell phone and take a picture of it, there should be a pop-up on your phone that allows you to access some of our websites and social media pages where you can connect with us. So thanks again for joining, and we should have some time left over for questions. I've been seeing a couple chat notifications pop up that I'll hopefully be able to address.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I have a bunch of questions here for you, starting with a very, very specific one. So somebody has a prairie restoration project going, and they want to know whether or not they should kill Canadian goldenrod. Are you able to answer that?
That's a tough one. And the thing I always think is so interesting about ecological restoration is that there's so much human bias and so many perspectives that you can bring into it. A rose is a weed in a vegetable garden. So if you love your Canadian goldenrod, I certainly won't stand against you enjoying it in your own backyard. But if you're looking to promote diversity and want to establish the highest quality grassland or prairie in your backyard, then that is something that we can kind of cut back on and introduce other native species that'll outcompete it. Something that the Spring Creek stewards have done is actually scything or mowing back sections of that goldenrod to create a little bit of heterogeneity or different types of habitat in your little backyard section, so that you have short areas where other plants can flourish and taller areas where the goldenrods can have their space too. So I'd be happy to talk more about it, and we've got lots of resources for backyard restorations as well.
Okay, how does one find volunteer opportunities close to them, whether it's near Spring Creek or somewhere else in the county?
Yeah, there's tons of great resources on that. One that I'll just keep plugging tonight is the Forest Preserve of Cook County website. On all of the different pages of the preserves, if there's an active volunteer group there, they'll have some information about the volunteer group there and how to get involved. But the shortest and easiest way, I would say, is to just give us an email and reach out to the Friends of the Forest Preserves. I like to think of us as kind of like the friendly face and this intermediary that can take the time to explain and talk through any questions that you might have and really help you figure out exactly what you want to do with the Forest Preserves. So the first step is just send me an email, and then we can talk more about it and figure out where you live and what the group that you'd like to connect with closest to you is.
Okay, next question is about the map that you showed comparing the 1800s and the 2015 in terms of forest preserve versus development. Are you able to note any changes since 2015 in terms of forest preserve land?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, and that's kind of a really great part of the forest preserves of Cook County is that they've recognized that one of the best things we can do is just acquire as much green space as we possibly can. So in Cook County, actually, kind of an outlier than the rest of the state of Illinois, the amount of high quality prairies that we have is actually growing as we learn to restore them and restore them more effectively, and we're kind of able to take on more chunks of land. So while the green space in that map hasn't really grown in a wholesale way, we've become a lot better at being able to restore the green spaces within the forest preserves, and they provide a lot more value to the wildlife that use them.
Was Spring Creek converted from farmland, and was it acquired for preservation?
Yes, yes to both. It was acquired for preservation, and it was a whole series of farmland. Some of our coolest restoration sites, one that I highly recommend anyone who comes and volunteers to visit, is called the 160. There's a fantastic site steward there who has really dedicated so much time to restoring this section, and it was actually 3 different farm fields as recently as 2007, and has been converted into a really high quality prairie. So Spring Creek itself is a mosaic of some remnant sections of woodlands or wetlands that were never turned into farms, but there's still quite a few homes, even like home structures that are still within the preserve, farm fields that have been converted to prairie, and farm fields that have still not, we still haven't been able to convert them yet. So you'll see a whole mix of former farms, standing homes. There's even a Civil War cemetery hidden in the preserve. There's a lot of really cool things to find, and it's a patchwork of areas that were previously occupied or used for ag.
Okay, this question is about the picture of Grassy Lake. Which wetland plants were they installing?
Oh yeah, great question. So among the Barrington Greenway Initiative, 2 of our really big focuses are on seeds and sedges. So seeds, we collect all sorts of species of native seeds, and we spend a lot of time in the summer and fall doing that. And then our focus in the spring is planting these wetland sedges. And a sedge is similar to a grass. It's like a grass. It's a grass-like plant that really loves wetter areas. And that's what was being planted in that photo at Grassy Lake. I think it was, I couldn't tell you the exact species because we actually plant a whole number of different species depending on how wet the soil is that we're planting. But there's a few kind of preferred species. There's a concept of the 10 warrior sedges, which are some of our strongest, most robust, kind of aggressive native sedges that are able to help reestablish wetlands. So it was one of those species.
And speaking of plants, where would you recommend looking to find out which wildflowers are blooming where and when?
That's a great question. I'll selfishly promote my volunteer newsletter, or the volunteer newsletter at the Spring Creek Stewards, where we try to highlight whatever plants are blooming or cool natural history information as it comes up. But there's a ton of resources on the internet where you can learn more about plants and also figure out what's blooming. The Chicago Botanic Gardens has a really great calendar of plants as they bloom throughout the year. And also the Field Museum has the system of rapid field guides that you can actually choose what sort of plant or animal you're interested to learn about, and then it creates a custom guide for you. And something I forgot to mention in the preserve, in the presentation, which I just think is the coolest thing, is that the Field Museum actually made plant guides for those Philip Juris paintings that I mentioned at the beginning. So if you're stuck at home and you want to learn plants, you can look at Philip Juris's pictures or his paintings, and then look at the Field Museum guide and figure out what plants are hiding in the paintings. But the Botanic Garden website is a great resource, Spring Creek Stewards newsletter, and then also those rapid field guides from the Field Museum.
If you want to get onto this fantastic newsletter you've been hearing about, just feel free to email Peter. directly, and he'll add you to the list. Back to the farmland question, a follow-up question. After you acquire farmland, what are some of the first things you do to convert it back to a natural state?
That's a really good question. And it kind of depends, like the question about tall goldenrod, it kind of depends on what your goal is for the site. One of the things that's really unique about Spring Creek Forest Preserve is that it's kind of this haven for grassland bird habitat, and grassland birds in particular love low-lying areas where the native or invasive plants haven't grown too tall, and they're able to create their nests on the ground close to smaller plants that grow around them. So one of the first things we do is establish a disturbance regime or a series of actions that we take to kind of mimic the natural actions that would occur to prairies. So for instance, we mow once a year or once every other year, or ideally we'd start to actually burn the area. And burning is something that native plants have adapted to, and they really respond positively to it. So one of the first things you do when you take a farm field and convert it to a prairie is you get your native grasses established, because those native grasses are the ones that are going to be able to actually carry a prescribed fire or carry fire through a prairie, and then open up that space, create those natural disturbances that native plants and flowers love, and kind of get the structure set for your diversity of species to move in from there. And lots of seed.
Peter, there's a question about ticks and volunteering. So maybe you could speak about ticks and then just other considerations for how to get outside right now during extreme heat, or other things to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I won't say that there are no ticks in Spring Creek Forest Preserve. It would be great if I could promise that. But anytime we go out for a hike or to volunteer in the preserve, we take a few precautions. A lot of folks will tuck their pants into their socks. When ticks are on tall grasses or plants as you brush by them as you walk on a trail, they're looking usually for exposed skin to come on. So if you tuck, like I always keep my shirt tucked into my pants, tuck my socks into my pants as well, and limit the amount of skin that I actually have exposed, that'll really cut down on the number of ticks that you'll be exposed to. And then I also do the same in regards to heat in the sun. It's kind of counterintuitive, but I always wear like light long sleeve and long pants to protect myself from the sun, and also just to keep yourself a little bit cooler so you don't end up getting sunburned. But definitely, especially this time of year, lots of water breaks, time spent in the shade, and really preparing ahead of time will go a long ways in making sure that you have a good experience whenever you visit the preserves.
Okay, I think that's about it. If we did not get to your question, we are going to capture everything from the chat and follow up with people who we might not have gotten to. But we're so glad you joined us today. We are going to reach out again with our contact information, and feel free to keep in touch with us via social media. Our website is fotfp.org. And do reach out to us anytime with questions if you need help, just like finding a spot on the map or where to like actually find the parking lot or the trail entrance. We're here for those types of questions. Friends is a membership-based organization. If you feel inspired to join us as a member or make any donation to support our work, Derek will pop our tip jar link onto the chat. One last question I have for you, Peter. What is your favorite animal or plant in Spring Creek?
Wow, that is so tough. Before I answer that, I will just encourage everybody, take down my email, and if you really have any questions at all, I'd love to hear from folks, so definitely do not hesitate to reach out, and just shoot me an email is usually the best and fastest way. The answer to that question changes all the time. So we asked this question at a recent staff meeting, and so I'll just rely on that answer that I pulled from last time. There's a plant in wetland areas, also kind of found on the edges of prairies, called Queen of the Prairie. And when I was in high school and first kind of getting into learning about native plants and spending time in restored areas, I stumbled upon that plant by accident and had no idea what it was. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, I would encourage you to Google it. It looks like a floating piece of cotton candy on the edge of a natural area, and it just like, it just blew my mind. I couldn't believe that there was such a vibrant, amazing plant that was native to Illinois. And the name itself is just so romantic and cool that I couldn't help myself. So that one sticks out right now. It's also in bloom right now in case anybody wants to try and go find it. So since it's in bloom right now, I'll say that. But I'll reserve the right to change my answer depending on what's in bloom right now or what I see.
All right, well done. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you,
I
everyone.
hope you get out to the preserve soon. Keep in touch.
If anyone's still on,
Okay.
thanks for the private messages from some of our Spring Creek volunteers and folks that are saying hi. Sorry I didn't get a chance to say hello.
I think everyone is off.
Okay.
Well done, Peter.
Oh, thank you. I kept like seeing
Oh.
chat notifications pop up, but I was a
We
little
have Diane
distracted.
still on. One
Diane.
person still on. I heard somewhere that you cannot capture the chat record on after you log off. Have you guys found that?
That's a good question. I don't know. I know when we did Benjamin's first webinar, I could see the chat in the Zoom recording. I could see it on the side of the screen and still view it. But then when it was converted to YouTube, it disappeared.
I see an option to save chat. Would you like me to do that before we
Yes.
log off?
Yes.
And let me know when we're ending it.
We're ending it.
Okay.
There's no good way to end it.
Okay. So I just saved the chat and see everybody later.
Yep.
Thank you both
Thanks,
very much.
Derek. Peter, do you want to debrief a little or